Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. So glad to have you today on Life Support. What we do in this program is we like to tell stories. We talk about redemption and how Jesus changes lives. And we're going a little bit of a different direction today, but a really exciting one. And my guest is the executive director and co-founder of Five Stone Media. You've heard me refer to Five Stone Media a number of times. His name is SteveJohnson, and Steve is got some exciting things to share. So welcome. Good to have you here. And it's good to have you because you actually run the show. So we had to have you.
Which show are you talking about?
Well, I think the one you're on right now.
And it's funny because we both have the same last name, too, which is quite a coincidence.
It is quite a coincidence. We also have the same parents, which neither of us are proud of, but we...
I think it's the other way around, Paul.
That's right.
They're not proud of either one of us.
Exactly. All right, so you run this organization called Five Stone Media. Tell me the genesis of that organization and the reason behind it.
Well, it started 17 years ago. My background is video, television production. I spent my career as, by and large, a television producer. And we were at a gathering of men from various churches around the Midwest at a gathering at a camp in Wisconsin 17 years ago. And a guy named John Turnipseed was asked to get up and share his story. And John stood up and said he had 30 members of his family in prison and 10 for first-degree murder, and he was the head of the Fathering Center at Urban Ventures in Minneapolis. And so the storytelling part of me my interest was piqued, to say the least. And so I approached John. I go, would you be interested in having some guys tell part of your story? And he said, yeah. He said, God actually kind of shared a vision that would happen at some point, and here you guys are. So all keeping our day jobs, I rounded up 4 colleagues, and we formed Five Stone Media as a nonprofit, literally just to tell one story. That was our intention. We were going to do a short video to give to John to speak, and John's been on this show several times.
Yes, he has.
And so he's familiar with a lot of the people here. But God had other plans, and that one video ended up being 3 short films that kind of took on a life of their own all over the world, in other countries, translated into other languages. And then we asked John to just John's a former felon, spent a lot of time behind bars, and now he's a preacher. So kind of do a brain dump for us on how you changed your life. And so he did that, and then we rounded up some other interviews of people like John, and that became a prison curriculum that we debuted in 2014 called Lifeblood. We have a men's version that's facilitated in prisons and jails, and we have a women's version too that's hosted by Ray Charles' daughter, Sheila Ray Charles. And that's in several states around the country. But what we found in facilitating in the prisons was that stories of shared experiences really were powerful. Because with no disrespect to pastors, it's not a pastor coming in and sharing Bible verses or preaching a sermon. It's people like them that have changed their lives. And they're all stories of Christian transformation, and we welcome all faiths. We've had Muslims in our classes, we've had atheists, but all of our stories are Christian transformation. And so, the other thing we found was that they all had kind of the same thing in common, in that they were a victim of some sort of a childhood trauma. And so we knew at that point we wanted to tell more stories that maybe were trauma-based, but we weren't quite sure what that looked like. And then a retired mental health professional came into our world named Terry Hands, and she said, you guys got to do that. And she goes, I have stories that I will bring to you. I have mental health professionals and therapists that I will bring to you that want to get this word out. And so 4 years ago, we rounded up some pastors and some therapists and go, what do you guys think? Is this worthy of doing? And they all said yes. So we started collecting stories of transformation in the field of trauma. And to date, I think we've collected something like 150 different stories. Many of them have been on this program over the last 2.5 years. And so that's catching you up on who and what Five Stone Media is. We live by 4 words, and that's story, hope, healing, and change. And that's kind of who we are. We're a small nonprofit based in Minneapolis.
So how receptive has the church community been to the curriculum on mental health?
Well, we have that. That was our latest video series called Caring for Mental Health, and it's a 10-part series. And again, it's a collection of stories with commentary from pastors and mental health professionals. And we have just rolled it out, so now we're training facilitators. And so one of the things we're finding is that it really is going to be just one church at a time that we need to approach because it's different. Coming out of the pandemic era, as you know, Paul, pastors are overwhelmed with a lot of different things. And so our idea, and I think what we want to do, is we want to train people to learn how to come along others who are in pain and suffering. So it shouldn't be just up to pastors, right, to do the counseling. It shouldn't be up to therapists to do the counseling because clients are lined up outside their, down the street, and they can't see everybody they need to see. So that leaves it up to the body of Christ. Is it our responsibility to at least know what to say? And so that's the big thing that we have found is people don't say anything.
Or what
those,
not to say.
Or what not to say, so people don't say anything. And so oftentimes people that are in trauma or depressed, or they feel isolated, even in the church, because people don't know what to say to them. And so that's our hope and our goal, is to just give some basics on how to do that with each other. And so that was the genesis leading up to a devotional that we are coming out with now.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. God is Always With You is the name of the devotional. I'm curious, you come from the quote-unquote secular media. You've worked at ESPN and Turner and different places. And Christian media does not have a great reputation for quality. Is that fair? In some places.
Yeah, I don't want to I don't want to accuse.
I understand
all of that.
I will then.
Okay.
Has that been a hindrance to you at all? And is that something that actually maybe motivates you, is to not fall into that trap of cranking that stuff out?
It definitely motivates us that we want to just deliver some quality work. And it doesn't mean that we have to produce a $20 million film. It just means that we want to do quality work. When we do these interviews and we gather these stories, we keep it really simple. Like, the tendency now with Instagram and the social media things is to just do a lot of fast-paced jump cuts, and you really lose the story. And people know how to edit, but they don't know how to tell a story. So we purposely just keep this really simple. We have a camera focused on the person telling the story, and but we want to, we hire professionals to do this.
Right. And everything you do is really good. And so you were doing this series with John on his story, which took place in Minneapolis, but you went off to L.A. to shoot it. And God kind of put some pieces together to help you do a quality production, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. We actually the same weekend that I met John Turnipseed around this campfire, the keynote speaker that weekend was a Los Angeles pastor, Erwin McManus, who, he was a friend of some of my now colleagues, and Erwin said, "Look, I've got a lot of young, talented filmmakers in my congregation that are really just looking for a break. They're extremely talented." And I go, "That sounds like a winner to me." And so he found a guy that he thought would be a good director, and it ended up writing and directing all 3 of our Turnipseed films. First film we wanted shot here in Minneapolis because we wanted it to be authentic and to take place where it actually happened. And so that was 2008. So we raised a lot of money because we had to fly the crew to Minneapolis and shoot everything here. And it was on film. We also wanted it to be authentic, and so we shot it on film, which is a very expensive proposition. And then the next two, actually, again, we thought there was only going to be one, but after a couple of years went by, we got an email from a warden of a prison in Louisiana that said, I showed the Turnip Seed film to the guys here, and they want to know what's next. So I go, well, we've got to finish this story. So I called our director, and Jimmy Duke is his name, out in Los Angeles. I said, what are we going to do? He goes, all right. He goes, I will round up our crew. I'll have them work virtually for nothing. We'll shoot it here in Los Angeles. And so next thing we know, he secured the studio where the Boston Legal television series had been shot. They had just finished shooting, so the studio was available. They basically, for the cost of hiring security, gave it to us to shoot. And so we did films 2 and 3 in the next 2 years.
And what you couldn't have known is that all of this tension in Minneapolis would be in the headlines, and all of a sudden here you are doing a story on the man who virtually ran that entire area as a gang leader that burned on that summer week.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you can just look it up online, but John Turnipseed's family, the Rolling 30s Bloods, basically controlled South Minneapolis, and Minneapolis at one time was called Murderapolis because of that, but that is the same area where all of the riots took place in 2020, and George Floyd murder took place in that same area. And so that has piqued the interest of other people out in Los Angeles, that there's quite a story yet to be told. And we have a long way to go with telling that story, particularly of John Turnipseed, but it's a powerful story of transformation.
Yeah, John's really a neat guy, and I remember sitting with him at a function, and I just asked him, I said, John, how do you, day in and day out, reconcile all the things that you've done? Because he's done some bad stuff. And he just looked right at me and said, I just believe in the redemption of Christ, and that's as simple as that. And he lives by that.
For sure. John, there's some men and women we work with that change their lives, but it's temporary, because for whatever reason they get back with kind of their old crew and they fall back into some of their old ways. But John, you just knew he lived a transformed life. And when he decided he was done with that, and this is documented in our films, but he got down on his knees and he begged God, for another chance. And he got those chances. And now John has a tremendous amount of influence in Minneapolis and South Minneapolis. And, I count him as one of my best friends. I mean, the other irony of all this, Paul, is we grew up in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, a suburban town, a very white community. And now, much of our work is in the African American community, which John has been wonderfully patient with me in introducing me to that world.
Yeah. The thing I like about John, too, is that he is very articulate, and he speaks with a lot of wisdom. Like, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know that this guy had been through all that. He's also the best-dressed man in town. He makes sure of that.
You hardly will ever see him out of a suit and tie.
That's right.
Anywhere. I don't know if he sleeps in that or not, but very seldom is he ever outside of that.
All right. So you've had a couple books come out of that as well, and you have a new one that's just hot off the press called God is Always With You. It's a devotional, 31 Days of Hope, Healing for Grief and Loss. Tell me what gave birth to this project.
Well, the publisher, so we had published a book, an autobiography of John Turnipseed back in 2016 called Bloodline, and it was done by a publisher called Broad Street Publishing, which is based here in Minneapolis. And the owner of Broad Street, his name is Carlton Garborg. We've become friends over the years, and as he saw us collect these stories, he came back to me and he goes, would you be interested in compiling some of these stories into a devotional to help people? And I said, I don't know if we're ready for that. And then he came back a second time and I said, I don't know if we're ready for that. And then we finally had lunch, and I said, I think we have enough stories now to a good sample of different sections and different kinds of grief and loss, and so that was the genesis. And then my production partner is Lee Bailey Sealer, who's a terrific writer in his own right. He started, along with a part-time employee of ours named John Wagey. They started collecting these stories. So how do you weed down 150 stories into 31 days of stories? And that's hard. And so that might be volume 2 and volume 3 by the time we do that. But we want a representation on different forms of loss and grief, and so that's we had to pick certain stories, and you're part of that, Paul. Not only with a couple of stories, but you're also one of our commentators on the pastoral side too.
Well, I find it really helpful to have focused devotional material. Diane Langberg, who we both are aware of, who's been a guest here, very well known on the trauma side of things, has put out a devotional for counselors who deal with trauma victims and for pastors. And I find that to be terrifically helpful. And so I think this book will be really meaningful to a lot of people because it does cover such a wide variety of stories, but there's a common thread in all of them.
Yeah. And one of the common threads is the people that we interview, they all have sort of a common story in how the church has reacted to their trauma. Mm-hmm. And many of those reactions were, you are not praying hard enough. If you had a little more faith, this wouldn't be happening to you. So what happens when that happens, right? It just drives you deeper into your grief and
isolation, loneliness.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we want to, so they all have said, if my story can help one other person, I want to tell that story. And so for many of these people, it's the first time they've ever told their story publicly. And they've all done just a wonderful job of being really honest and forthright. And so it's to help other people. It's not to call attention to their story at all, but it's so that person that's going through that. So we break it down. So it's grief and loss. We break it down into six sections. So, for instance, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a marriage, the loss of a young child, the loss of an adult child, mm-hmm. the loss of innocence. We have some stories of people that have lost their innocence because of abuse and child abuse, et cetera, et cetera. The loss of mental health. And many of these people fall into multiple categories, or they start out in one category, right? And because of their loss, because of the loss of innocence, then they fall into the loss of mental health.
Well, and there's re-victimization. Right? There's all of that going on. Yeah.
And so we have 8 different sections. It's 31 days. It's really easy reading. But some of the stories are so powerful. We've got, just the loss of a spouse can be Julie Hall, who's a therapist who mm-hmm. watched her husband die, who's been on this show, and she just recently remarried. But she talks, she became a therapist because she couldn't get help. And so she wanted to offer help for grief. And so mm-hmm. she's become a real expert on the topic of grief. So again, 31 stories of just, some of it's just gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
Some of it's sexual abuse mm-hmm. as a child. Some of it's sexual abuse within a marriage, mm-hmm. multiple marriages, but there's a redemption to all of that. And so we'll have pastors and mental health professionals that work with us on a regular basis offer help and commentary. So we don't just leave the story open-ended, right? So there's got to be a way to get from point A to point B. Yeah,
and there's a summary after each story, and there's scripture to go along with it.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting is I've been around this, not nearly as in depth as you, but just long enough to see some of these people that you're referring to, and to watch them move forward in their lives. Is really, really intriguing because. When they appear here or on one of the videos that you shot, they're devastated. They're trying to get their story out. They're crying. 2 or 3 years later, they're starting to get their feet under them. God is redeeming that, and it's really exciting to see lives change.
And it's a complete joy.
Yeah.
To watch them develop as people. I mean, I've had people. So my background is secular television, and I'm around I've been around that world for 30 years, and you talk about people that are just me-oriented, and so now I have, people say, well, how can you be around people that are, have stories like that all the time? I go, well, it's a joy to be around them because, number one, they're real people. I mean, they're living real lives, and to watch them progress as people, we all have a story to tell. Everybody has a story to tell. If we would just recognize that, but when they do tell their story, something happens to them. Right?
Yeah, it's healing for them.
It is very, and you know that too.
Yep. Every time you talk about the tragedies that happen in your life, it's painful to talk about it, and there's an incredible healing that comes with that each time. And so you begin to talk about it with less and less pain each time.
Yeah.
But, these people are also reliving it, and it's hard. But the book itself is not the least bit depressing. It's hopeful. It's just real, and I think we need more real, especially in the culture we're living in right now.
Yeah, for sure. We have, we get comments from people that have even read early editions that we've got out, and it's unbelievable. It's like, God led me to this one chapter, and it's exactly what I needed to read, and now I'm excited to read the rest of the chapters. And it's 31 days, so it's not a long process to get through it.
Right. We'll talk about how to get it in just a moment, but what's next for Five Stone Media down the road?
Well, we stay busy for a very small staff, but our next series that we are in development of right now is on recovery. It's called Exploring Your Recovery, and we are piloting. Again, it's stories, story-based, and it's really simple stuff. It's people that have been through recovery, telling their story, and then we discuss it. Okay, and so there's a church here in the Twin Cities that is piloting it for us. We've had really, really positive results from the pilot. So our next goal now is to actually finish that curriculum. So we still have a lot of interviews to shoot. We have a lot of editing and writing to do on it. But that's kind of what's next for us.
All right, if I want to make a donation to Five Stone Media and help you along, because again, this is a nonprofit, and how am I going to get in touch with the organization?
And before I answer that, I just want to say, as an organization, we made a decision this past year that all of our resources, we just want to give them away. We don't want money to get in the way of any of our our video resources are all just given away. So you can log on for that to lifesupportresources.org and register and have access to all of our video resources. As far as access to the book, it's available in Target stores, but the easiest way to find it is fivestonemedia.com. Just spell it out, fivestonemedia.com, and there's a link that you can get to the book. Or Barnes & Noble, again, Target stores, some of your popular stores like that.
And I think in this day and age, your video material is really helpful because video is such an important part of what we do in church. It's also the most expensive part of doing church. And I think a lot of churches struggle to find video content, and you're offering really solid biblical content that could be used for small groups. It could be used for sermon illustrations. It could be used for a lot of different things.
Yeah, I know you've done a whole series using illustrations from these videos. So we have all different categories for pastors to get in and tell a story. If they want to deliver a message about depression or anxiety or whatever, they just get on. We have a video that they can use as a sermon starter. If they don't have, so a lot of our churches are really small churches, right? So they may not have the capacity to shoot some of their own videos.
Right.
So we have that for them. And again, it's no cost to them.
And you're on Right Now Media, correct?
We are.
Yeah.
Our prison curriculum, Lifeblood, and then we have another curriculum, which I haven't even talked about, was called The Worst Loss. That's with Right Now Media. And, so if your church subscribes to that, you can get that there.
All right, good enough. So the book is called God is Always With You, 31 Days of Hope, Healing for Grief and Loss. Again, fivestonemedia.com, or you can just go to a bookstore and check it out as well. But it's well worth the time.